World War II, marked by brutality and unimaginable violence, left deep scars across Europe. But in one of the darkest moments in history, at the Stalag XP Sędziobostel camp, an act of humanity emerged that transcended the war and its horrors. When the British troops finally entered the camp on April 18, 1945, they encountered a scene of utter devastation. Over 30,000 prisoners were confined in terrible conditions, scattered across open fields, makeshift barns, and dirty huts, as if they were disposable. Most of them could barely stand. The body of many was consumed by hunger, malnutrition, and relentless diseases like typhus and dysentery that spread rapidly in the camp. In the final days, Sędziobostel had become a graveyard, a territory where death wasn't merely a shadow, it was the dominating presence. When the British troops arrived at the camp, they were confronted by the destruction left in the wake of the war. The prisoners, many of whom could barely move, were spread out in every corner. Some were so debilitated they couldn't even lift their heads to look at the British soldiers. Others, with empty, lifeless eyes, seemed to have already given up the fight. Hunger was overwhelming, and suffering was indescribable. The camp had turned into a cemetery, with dozens of bodies scattered everywhere. The men and women who were there had been stripped of their humanity, reduced to numbers, treated like commodities by a regime that sought to erase them. Death was a constant presence, and amidst the devastation, the few survivors seemed to only wait for their own departure. Among the prisoners was a young Dutchman named Peter. He was in a deplorable state. His body was almost nothing but skin and bones. Trembling, he could barely breathe. The pain he was experiencing was visible in every movement, and his eyes, once full of life and hope, now seemed hollow, as if he had already surrendered to the inevitability of death. But even in his desperate condition, Peter still had something incredibly precious: his humanity. On that fateful morning, a young British doctor who was in the POW camp kneeled beside Peter. Recognizing that he was on the brink of death, he had witnessed many horrors on the battlefield, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to see. Peter, with his last ounce of strength, clung to another prisoner, a man even weaker than himself, who was already dying. The weaker prisoner was struggling for his last breaths, and Peter, in an act of compassion, refused to leave him alone. He held the man's hand with both of his fingers gently caressing the hand in almost a protective manner as he whispered, "He's dying, but he shouldn't die alone." It was a simple gesture, yet one of immeasurable humanity. Amidst the despair and death surrounding Sędziobostel, Peter had chosen to offer another human being what he himself longed for: dignity in his final moments. The British doctor, watching the scene, knew there was little more to be done. The weaker prisoner passed away in a matter of minutes, still holding Peter's hand. Peter's act of not letting go of the dead man's hand, resisting the urge to abandon someone who could no longer respond, was something that would stay with anyone who witnessed it. He remained with the deceased man, holding his hand tightly, until the doctor finally placed a hand on Peter's shoulder. Only then, exhausted, did Peter finally release the hand, but not without whispering, "No one here had anyone else. Today, he had me." Stalag XP Sędziobostel was not just a place for men. It was also home to many women. Although many women were forced to hide or work in the shadows, some were actively involved in the process of care and resistance. Nurses, resistance fighters, and others, often invisible in historical narratives, played crucial roles by offering what they could to help the prisoners. Brave women who, alongside the men, risked their lives to provide food, medicine, and even a little comfort to those who, like Peter, were condemned to die. These women, many of whom were part of clandestine networks, became the backbone of many POW camps, helping to keep hope alive where it seemed impossible. Even as everything around them was falling apart, they were there, providing what they could: a piece of bread, a word of consolation, a helping hand. Many of these women paid a heavy price for their actions, with their lives often marked by persecution and violence at the hands of the Nazi forces. But the humanity they showed, just like Peter, was the flame that remained lit amidst the darkness. Peter passed away the following morning, before the Allied field hospitals could reach him. The young British doctor who had stayed with him until the end would later write about the experience. "I have seen courage in battlefields, but nothing compared to this man who, even in his desperate state, used his last strength to give dignity to a stranger in his final moments." Peter's death was not merely the loss of a prisoner. It was the loss of a human being who, even at the edge of death, managed to show the true essence of humanity. The ability to care for another, to share the most precious thing we have: our time, our presence, our love. In a war camp where death had become routine, Peter did something that few could do. He turned an act of despair into a moment of solidarity and dignity. He did what many believe is impossible under extreme conditions. He made sure that even in death, someone didn't die alone. His death was a tragedy, but his gesture lived on, becoming a symbol of resistance. In a concentration camp where humanity was being erased, he brought it back, if only for a brief moment. The Stalag XP Sandbostel camp witnessed not only deaths but also a lasting lesson about what it truly means to be human. Even when everything seemed lost, in a scene of utter devastation, there was room for a small gesture of compassion, a moment of humanity, and this is not something war can erase. The memory of Peter and the British doctor, as well as the women who, in silence, resisted the horror, will remain alive forever. Even in the darkest of circumstances, the light of humanity can shine, not because life is easy, but because goodness, courage, and compassion are stronger than death.